welcome to the first production from this tiny little storage barn that I call my shop. I am the Backwoods Craftsman, and I'm going to show you how to turn this into this. Now, so as you can see here, I have this piece of 2x4 that's been ripped down to 1 3/4 inches, which is going to be the width of my sword blade. The next step is, of course, to measure the thickness we want our blade to be. 1/2 inch would be sufficient for blade stability. Making sure that your saw is set to the correct depth and vision and hearing protection installed, cut out your blade. Using whatever tool you have, smooth down the surface of your blade to make it more aesthetically appealing. I'm using a planer. And our next step is to figure out the design for the tip of the sword as well as the handle. We'll start with the tip here. Mark the center of the blade approximately, and sketch out your tip radius. Try to make it as consistent as possible. Now for the handle. Choose whether you want it to be able to be held by 1 or 2 hands, and sketch the length accordingly. This is going to be a 1.5-hand sword, also known as a bastard sword in medieval terminology. Because it's in between the two grip sizes. And now we'll go to a sanding block to smooth out the edges. Now for the cross guard. Start out by laying out your blade onto the piece of wood you're making your guard out of, so you can preview what the cross guard will look like on the blade. And then measure the same distance from both sides that looks good to you. And then sketch the guard out to those points. Next, we need to thin down this piece of wood so that it's thick enough for the blade to fit inside of it nicely and not too thin that it'll split when you hit it on anything during your swing. I'm using a hatchet for this just to prevent the wasted time of sawing it down when the hatchet is readily available. Now I'll go back to the planer to smooth out that last cut, but you could easily use a piece of rough sandpaper on a flat surface, and moving the block of wood back and forth on it repeatedly will gradually smooth out the back. Now if you are using a planer for this, make sure you put it in your vise square, otherwise you'll put this angle here and it's very annoying. So square. Next we need to figure out a way to get the excess material out of the internal curvature of the guard. I'm going to use a chisel, mainly because I just need to become more proficient in its usage. But you could easily use a jigsaw or a coping saw. When you're using a wood chisel like this and you're wanting to cut a radius, you put the bevel side down to the wood so you can adjust the angle of your cut. Now that we have it basically roughed out with a chisel, we can move on to either a rasp or some rough sandpaper wrapped around something with a sharp radius to it so we can get into these curves and round it out. Now for the pommel. We'll start by marking the center of this board, right here about, somewhere, and putting one side of our compass on that point, and calibrating it to the edge. Scribe in that line. We are obviously making a circular pommel. To make it easier when you're cutting out this blank, just trace over your scribe line with a pencil. And cut it out. Now the next step is to round off our cuts we did with the jigsaw. I'm using a belt sander for this, but you can of course, yet again, use sandpaper. Now, as you can see, the pommel's been smoothed out. You'll also notice that I flattened out this edge, which will make it easier to drill the holes to slide the sword tang into. To make the slot that you slide the sword tang into, start by selecting the drill bit that is the same diameter as your handle or tang is thick. And that fits decently. Next, we'll mark on the pommel each edge of the tang. And sketch out a rough center line. To make sure the depths of all the holes are consistent, you can put a piece of masking tape on the drill bit at the depth that you want the holes to be. To make an oval-shaped hole like we're doing here, we'll start by drilling one hole. And then we'll move the bit over just to the edge of this first hole and drill that out. And now we'll sand off the splinters left by the rasp. Next we have to make a hole in the crossguard big enough to fit the sword tang through. So we'll start by finding the center of each piece. Next we line up the two center marks, and at each edge of the tang, put a mark on the crossguard. And continue those lines across. Now position the sword blade vertically in the crossguard and mark the thickness of the tang. And again, sketch those lines across. You could use a straight edge for this, but it doesn't have to be that accurate. Now the rectangle we have on the crossguard is the same dimensions as the thickest part of the tang. Now we need to drill two holes on opposite corners from each other with a bit that's big enough to fit the blade of this miter saw through. Now we remove the blade of the miter saw, and then insert it through one of the holes that we just drilled. And then put the blade back in the saw. And now you can cleanly cut out the rectangle. If the guard doesn't fit right after you've cut it out, you can use a knife to shave out the excess wood until it does. And I just switched to a thinner knife so I can really get down in there to shave it out. And I also changed camera positions. And there we go. Should fit together tightly. Now we gotta glue them off. Now I know a lot of times when people are using wood glue, they'll just slather it on there and just have it squeezing out everywhere and gripping. That's really not necessary, it's just as long as you have sufficient clampage. The excessive quantity is not needed. No, it's okay if it smears along the tank because we're going to wrap that later. Smear that around into the cracks. Now we need to figure out a way to clamp this. So this is all I could think of. I just clamped the blade to the front of the bench and then put 2 quick grips around the bottom lip of the bench and then onto the guard from there. That seems to work pretty good. Alright, so now the glue's dried, but as you can see my palm will rotate a little bit here. It actually looks kind of cool because it indicates which direction you should hold it. But make sure your holes in the palm are drilled at even depths, the 2 holes that make the large ovular one. Otherwise they're going to be kind of wonkish like that. So I chose to use paracord to wrap the handle because that's what looked good to me, but you use whatever you want. So you start out by pulling a length of paracord over the cross guard. Let's see why this is necessary in a bit. Then pull it down to just before the palm. And then pinch it right there. Then start wrapping tightly. And once you've finished your wrap, pull out about the same length that you stretched out initially. And cut it off. Now because of that length that we stretched out, you can tie it. I recommend doing a double knot. And to seal this in place forever and ever, you can melt the knot. Okay, that didn't work as well as I planned. I heated it way too much and actually melted through the paracord. So I'm going to have to wrap it again, which is a total waste. So don't heat it up so much that it'll incinerate totally. Just use it. So, to wrap. Okay, so here's the new wrap. That time the melting held pretty well, but it looks kind of globby, but it just takes some practice to get it consistent. And I had to do another sanding of the crossguard because the wood got a little bit burnt. Now, this last step you can leave out if you just want to use the sword as a sword. But in the video description I described it as a flaming sword. So that's what I'm going to make. I am working on cutting some notches in the blade so the lighter fluid can seep in and hopefully burn for a bit longer. So I'll do that. Oh yeah, and I mark these each at an inch increment. And we're going to cut about 1/4 of an inch in each time. Now for a test. at the floor really well too, which I just did. And your cat. Reach into your back pocket and grab your zipper. The Sword of Flame. Thank you guys for watching and have a good one.